For a century, combat shotguns were simple, brutal tube-fed tools. Pump the action, point it roughly in the right direction, and hope for the best. Then, Heckler & Koch decided to treat 12-gauge shells like precision rifle cartridges. The result was a weapon so advanced it felt like science fiction, and so complex it nearly bankrupted the project before a single unit ever reached a soldier's hands. This is the story of the close assault weapon system, the gun that tried to drag the shotgun kicking and screaming into the modern age. The problem with military shotguns. By the early 1980s, the military shotgun was the forgotten child of the infantry arsenal. While rifles had gone through decades of relentless evolution, delayed blowback systems, roller-locked actions, polymer furniture, optics rails, the combat shotgun had barely moved since the First World War. You still had the Mossberg 500, the Remington 870. Pump action, tube-fed, 5 to 8 rounds of standard buckshot, and a cyclic rate roughly on par with a determined man with a pitchfork. And look, those guns aren't bad. They're reliable, they're simple, and they've earned their place. But their limitations in a military context were glaring. Tube magazines meant slow reloads under stress. Shove one in, shove another in, one at a time, while someone is actively trying to kill you. Inconsistent ammunition performance meant you never quite knew what you were getting. And accuracy? Beyond about 40 meters with standard buckshot, you were essentially just spreading pellets and hoping. Special forces units did use shotguns, specifically for one job: breaching. Blow a hinge off a door, blast a padlock, and then somebody else with a proper rifle goes in. It was a supporting tool, not a primary weapon. Nobody trusted it as the main event, but here's where the Cold War changed the calculation. Urban warfare was becoming the future of conflict. Hostage rescue, building clearance, close quarters combat in alleyways and stairwells where a rifle was too long and a pistol wasn't enough. NATO planners could see exactly what kind of fight was coming, and they knew the humble pump action wasn't going to be up to it. What they needed was a shotgun reimagined from the ground up. Something fast-firing, magazine-fed, accurate, and chambered in ammunition specifically designed for military use rather than hunting pheasant on a weekend. Enter the JSSAP program. The JSSAP program and the brief. In 1983, the U.S. military's Joint Service Small Arms Program issued a requirement for what they called the Close Assault Weapon System, or CAWS. The brief was extraordinary. They didn't want a better pump action. They wanted something categorically different: full auto capability, a detachable box magazine, effective range of at least 100 meters. And critically, they wanted purpose-built ammunition, high-velocity flechette loads, tiny tungsten darts, capable of defeating light body armor at close range. Two companies took up the challenge seriously. Winchester teamed up with Olin to produce one contender, and Heckler & Koch, working alongside Olin as well on the ammunition side, produced the other. That H&K entry is the one that matters here, because when the Germans from Oberndorf put their minds to reinventing something, they don't just improve it. They rebuild it from first principles. That's what they'd done with the MP5. That's what they did here. What makes it special right? The HKCAWS. Let's talk about what this thing actually was, because it was unlike anything that had come before it in 12 gauge. First, the layout. It was a bullpup. The action sat behind the trigger group, which meant a full-length barrel in an overall package roughly the size of a submachine gun, about 775 millimeters from end to end with the stock extended. That's shorter than an M16 while having a longer barrel than most dedicated shotguns of the era. Compact enough to swing around inside a vehicle, a corridor, a stairwell. This wasn't an accident, it was a direct response to the environment's cause was being designed for. The feed system was the next revolution. Gone was the tube magazine under the barrel. In its place, a detachable 10-round box magazine, double-stacked, sitting inside the bullpup chassis. 10 rounds. Ready immediately. Swap it out in seconds, just like a rifle. The psychological shift this represented was enormous. Suddenly, a shotgun could be in the fight for a sustained period rather than requiring the shooter to pause and reload round by round while exposed. But here's where it gets genuinely brilliant. The operating system. The HKCAWS used a gas-regulated short-stroke piston system, not simple blowback, not a long-stroke piston, but a precision-adjustable short-stroke setup borrowing directly from H and K's rifle engineering philosophy. The gas port tapped propellant gases from the barrel, drove a short-travel piston rearward, and cycled the action. The key word is regulated. The system could be tuned to handle different ammunition types and pressures, lethal flechette loads, breaching rounds, less lethal options, without the reliability degrading. Think about what that means. A single weapon, adjustable to perform consistently across an entire family of purpose-built loads. That is rifle program thinking applied to a 12-gauge. The trigger group offered semi-auto and full auto fire, with a cyclic rate of around 240 rounds per minute on full auto. Controlled, deliberate, not the frantic spray of a machine gun, but a measured, lethal cadence. It had a folding stock option, ambidextrous controls, and a receiver designed to accept optical sights. Every element said, this is a serious military weapon, not a hunting tool with a pistol grip bolted on. And then there was the ammunition. This is the part that genuinely felt like science fiction. The standard cause load was the flechette cartridge, a 12-gauge shell packed with 8 tungsten alloy darts, each roughly the width of a thick needle, traveling at around 530 meters per second. At that velocity, those flechettes were armor-defeating at close range, had a tighter dispersion pattern than standard buckshot at distance, and hit with enough kinetic energy to be immediately effective. At 100 meters, the range where conventional buckshot was already struggling, the cause flechette load was still performing. A buckshot round at that distance is doing almost nothing useful. The flechette load was still a serious threat. There were also specialized breaching rounds, again purpose-designed for the CAWS, producing less over-penetration risk than standard buckshot while blowing locks and hinges apart with clinical efficiency. The competition, how does it compare? Now, while all this was happening, the wider world of military shotguns wasn't standing completely still. The Benelli M4, the M1014 in U.S. service, represents what happened when you took a more conventional approach to modernizing the shotgun. Gas operated like the CAWS, but semi-auto only, tube-fed, 8 rounds, firing standard 12-gauge loads. It was adopted by the U.S. Marines in 1999, and it's an excellent weapon. Reliable, robust, battle-proven, but stack it next to the CAWS concept, and the differences are stark. The Benelli is a refined conventional shotgun. The CAWS was an attempt to create an entirely new weapon class. The Benelli fires standard ammunition available anywhere on the planet. The CAWS required its own purpose-built cartridge ecosystem. The Benelli can be carried by any soldier with minimal training adjustment. The CAWS demanded a new doctrine, new logistics chains, new ammunition stockpiles. That comparison tells you a lot about why one of these weapons ended up in service and the other didn't. The trials and the collapse testing ran through the mid to late 1980s, and the results were genuinely impressive. The HKCAWS performed. The flechette ammunition delivered on its promises downrange. The gas regulation system handled different loads reliably. Special Forces evaluators who put rounds through it came back with positive reports. This wasn't a paper project that fell apart under real-world conditions. The gun worked. The problems were never about the engineering. The first problem was cost. Purpose-built tungsten flechette cartridges are not cheap to manufacture. Standard military 12-gauge buckshot is inexpensive, widely available, and sits in warehouses around the world. The CAWS flechette round required a dedicated production line, specialized materials, and a supply chain that simply didn't exist outside the program. Equipping an infantry unit with a CAWS meant committing to that ammunition pipeline indefinitely. The per-round cost was sobering, and the bean counters in the Pentagon could see exactly where this was heading. The second problem was logistics. The genius of the CAWS, its purpose-built ammunition optimized for the weapon, was simultaneously its fatal weakness. Standard shotgun ammunition would technically fit but would not give you the performance the system was designed around. You couldn't just raid the nearest ammunition depot if your specialist loads ran dry. In the fog of war, that's not a quirk. That's a catastrophe waiting to happen. The third problem was timing. By the early 1990s, the Cold War was ending. The threat environment that had driven JSSAP, Warsaw-packed urban assault scenarios, heavy body armor, the need for armor-defeating close-quarters fire, suddenly looked different. Defense budgets across NATO were contracting. Programs that couldn't demonstrate an immediate, irreplaceable capability were being reviewed. And the CAWS, brilliant as it was, couldn't pass that test convincingly enough to justify the investment. In 1989, the CAWS program was formally canceled. Not because the weapon had failed, because the world around it had changed faster than the procurement system could keep up. So, what actually came of it? On the surface, nothing. No nation adopted the CAWS. No Special Forces unit standardized on it. The flechette ammunition never went into mass production. You can't walk into an armory today and find one. But here's the thing about ambitious failures. They teach the next generation of engineers something that cautious successes never could. The thinking that produced the CAWS, box magazine-fed shotguns, purpose-designed breaching ammunition, short-stroke gas operation tuned for variable loads, didn't disappear with the program. It filtered into subsequent designs. The concept of the magazine-fed shotgun found its way into weapons like the Saiga 12 and eventually the Fostech Origin. The idea of optimizing the shotgun's operating system for reliability across diverse loads influenced later military designs. The breaching doctrine that CAWS was helping to formalize became standard in Special Forces units worldwide, even if they were doing it with more conventional tools. And H&K's willingness to apply their rifle-quality engineering standards to what everyone else treated as a simple tool proved a point that would echo across decades of weapons development. Treating ammunition as a precision system rather than a blunt instrument changes what's possible. That idea eventually fed into programs like the FNP-90's 5.7x 28mm round and H&K's own MP7, weapons where the cartridge and the firearm were designed as a single integrated system from day one. The HKCAWS wasn't a dead end. It was a message that arrived about 20 years ahead of anyone ready to receive it. Today, the combat shotgun is still fundamentally the Benelli M4 or the Mossberg 590. Reliable, conventional, and magazine limited. The flechette ammunition dream never made it into standard service. The purpose-built close assault weapon class that JSSAP imagined never materialized. But every time a Special Forces unit breaches a door with a purpose-loaded round, every time an engineer argues for treating a weapon's ammunition as part of the weapon's design, every time a program manager has to weigh specialized performance against logistical simplicity, they are, in some small way, reckoning with the questions that the HKCAWS asked first. The shotgun by which all others were judged, and found too conventional. The weapon that proved German engineers could build the future, just not one the world was ready to pay for. The CAWS. Not 3 digits. Just one bold, expensive, brilliant idea that arrived too soon. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, check out this one here for more great military weapons content.